Hanna Marie Mack was born on June 2, 2001, to Russell and Dana Mack in Ennis, Texas. She was a joyful, imaginative little girl who had just started first grade. Hanna loved dressing up like a princess, reading her favorite books, riding her bike, and playing with her dolls. At just 6 years old, she was living with her mom in the quiet, close-knit community of Navarro Mills Lake, southwest of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Also living in the home was Dana's boyfriend, Kilwein Anders, not to be confused with a nearby neighbor, Shaun Arender, whose DNA would later break open the case. On the morning of September 10, 2007, Dana woke up to a nightmare. Hanna was missing from her bedroom. Within minutes, she made a horrific discovery. Her daughter's body was in their detached garage, hanging from the rafters. The initial investigation quickly zeroed in on Kilwein Anders. Authorities found disturbing, inappropriate images of children on his computer. He was arrested, convicted, and sent to prison in 2007, where he remains to this day. His parole has been denied over and over. Though he was the primary suspect in Hanna's murder, no physical evidence ever directly linked him to the crime. Then a breakthrough. DNA recovered from Hanna's clothing matched her neighbor, 19-year-old Shaun Arender, who lived less than a mile away. Arender had a criminal history that included burglary and drug offenses. He was already on law enforcement's radar. After his arrest, he agreed to plead guilty in 2008 in exchange for a sentence of life in prison without parole. But before the plea was finalized, Arender made a bombshell revelation in court. He claimed that Kilwein Anders had actually orchestrated the entire crime. According to Arender, he was walking through the neighborhood smoking marijuana when Anders invited him over. They shared drugs, and then, according to Arender, things took a horrifying turn. He said Anders led him toward the house, brought Hanna outside, and when she started to scream, Anders choked her until she passed out. Arender said he froze, overwhelmed by shock, and believed she had died after being choked a second time. He went on to claim that Anders then encouraged him to assault the unconscious child, telling him it was something she had experienced before. Afterwards, they allegedly moved Hanna's body to the garage and staged the scene by hanging her with an extension cord. When the judge asked whether Hanna was still alive at that point, Arender said she was unresponsive and wasn't opening her eyes. The courtroom was devastated. One of Hanna's aunts reportedly fled the room in tears. Arender's attorney said his client came forward to clear his conscience. He also revealed something disturbing. Anders and Arender had first met in jail before Hanna's murder. Despite Arender's detailed testimony, no new charges were ever brought against Kilwein Anders. To this day, there's still no forensic evidence tying him to Hanna's murder. But many believe Anders played a much larger role than was ever proven in court. Some speculate that Arender's claims and Anders' criminal history are exactly why parole continues to be denied. Arender is currently serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Anders also remains in prison, still serving time on charges related to inappropriate material involving children. Neither man has walked free since Hanna's death. Hanna's murder rocked Navarro County and broke hearts across Texas. The details of her case were almost too horrific to comprehend, and yet what's never been lost is the memory of who she was, a sweet little girl who loved storybooks, sparkly costumes, and the magic of childhood. Hanna will always be 6, and her family and her community will always remember her. Henry X. Smith was born on July 6, 1968, in Batesville, Indiana, to Beecher Smith and Jewel Compston. He grew up in a small, tight-knit town where just about everybody knew each other, and he had a deep love for the outdoors. By the time he was 43, Henry had built a simple life. He fished, hunted mushrooms, chased squirrels, just the kind of man who found peace in nature. He lived in Laurel, Indiana, but worked as a general laborer at the Applegate Company in Hamilton, Ohio. Henry looked out for people, especially the ones he cared about, but he was also considered the black sheep of his family. His life hadn't been easy. He struggled with mental health and spent time in and out of jail. He didn't have much, but he was trying. And in the last chapter of his life, he was finding peace, reading the Bible, studying scripture with his friend Jacob Napier. He was making changes. But all of that was cut short on Sunday, September 25th, 2011. That morning, Henry left the house he shared with his mother to go visit the Napier family, his friends. Later that day, his cousin Spencer passed him on the road. They waved at each other. No one knew it then, but that would be the last time anyone in the family saw Henry alive. The events of that day would become known as the Laurel Five murders, though to be clear, the home where it all happened was actually much closer to the small town of Buena Vista than to Laurel. The property sat along Stips Hill Road, a quiet rural stretch where homes are few and far between. Still, every news story and headline labeled it Laurel, and soon the whole country would know that name. 4 members of the Napier family were found shot to death inside their mobile home that afternoon: Roy, Angela, Melissa, and Jacob. Angela had just been visiting. Jacob was only 18. Melissa, 23, had a little girl, 4 years old. That little girl, Sierra Mann, survived, but she saw everything. Later that day, she was found walking alone, barefoot, and in shock along a country road. John Kessler, a retired firefighter, and his wife spotted her while driving by. They stopped immediately. She didn't speak, just stared off into space, tears silently rolling down her cheeks. She had just watched her entire family be murdered. And then she saw something else. She saw Henry Smith try to save her. Henry had arrived at the house sometime after the murders began. It's believed he sensed something was off and managed to get Sierra out, either through the door or a window. He had no idea David Ison, the man who had just murdered her family, was still inside the home, and he definitely didn't know Amanda Napier was sitting outside in a vehicle. Amanda, who wasn't related to the Napier family despite sharing their last name, had allegedly set up a drug deal between Ison and Roy Napier. She saw Henry arrive, and instead of warning him, she warned Ison. That phone call sealed Henry's fate. Ison stormed out, armed, and chased Henry down. He shot him in the chest, then beat him so badly his face was unrecognizable. Sierra witnessed it all from the window. She had already seen her family executed. Now she watched the only person who tried to protect her be murdered too. Henry wasn't even there to fight. Earlier that day, Roy Napier and Ison had gotten into a dispute over pills. Roy had raised the price by $2. That argument, according to investigators, may have sparked the massacre. But Henry walked into a nightmare he didn't cause, didn't understand, and never saw coming. In the end, his final act was trying to save a child. There was one other member of the immediate Napier family who wasn't at home that day, 26-year-old Josh Napier. He was left to bury his mother, father, brother, sister, and his friend Henry. That's a kind of grief most people can't imagine. When police arrived at the scene, Henry was missing, so naturally suspicion fell on him. But then they found his body across the road, shot, beaten, and left for dead. It became painfully clear he wasn't the killer, he was the 5th victim. Sierra Mann, now grown, still credits Henry with saving her life. His final moments weren't defined by his past or the mistakes he'd made. They were defined by courage. Despite his reputation as the black sheep, Henry received a hero's burial. David Ison was arrested just days later. Police found the murder weapon, an AK-47, blood-stained clothes, a stolen phone, and more. He was wearing a disguise when they caught him: wig, fake beard, glasses, and hat. His rap sheet already stretched a mile long: armed robbery, burglary, forgery, counterfeiting. He was even on probation when he committed the murders. And yet, he didn't get the death penalty. Neither did Amanda Napier. She walked away without being charged for her role in Henry's murder. Months earlier, she had been arrested for acting as Ison's getaway driver during a failed robbery in another county, but when it came to the murders, nothing stuck. She's free today. Ison eventually pleaded guilty to all charges. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. one for each of the 5 people he killed, including Henry Smith. The death penalty was on the table, but Ison avoided it by pleading guilty and accepting life in prison instead. And then, in one final moment of cruelty, as he was being led out of the courtroom, he turned and shouted, "Life over death." An ironic thing to say, coming from a man who took 5 lives. Henry's mother, Jewel, once told reporters, Henry never made it back home, and he didn't, but he died doing something good, something selfless, something that mattered. Henry wasn't just a man with a troubled past. He was someone with heart, with courage, and in the end, with faith. James Lee Appleton was born on November 14, 1957, in Merriam, Kansas, to Jack and Gwen Appleton. He was the kind of man who made an impression, not by being loud or flashy, but by being solid, steady, and kind. People who knew him described him as smart, soft-spoken, and devoted to the people he loved. He believed in hard work and lived that belief every day. After graduating from Southwest High School in 1975, James built a long, dependable career. He spent more than 27 years as a supervisor at Emerson Electric, then transitioned into carpentry for 12 more. Eventually, he joined the Gateway Rural Water Authority. By then, he'd settled into the quiet town of Garfield, Arkansas, a place he loved. He wasn't just doing a job, he was helping keep his community running. That's who James was. But on the morning of February 23, 2017, his life was cut short in a sudden and violent act. James was sitting in his work truck, talking to his brother-in-law, who, at the time, was the mayor of Gateway, when a car pulled up beside him. Without warning, a man raised a gun and fired a single shot through the window, striking James in the face. By the time first responders arrived, it was too late. James was gone. The town was stunned. And the man arrested for the murder, that made it even harder to comprehend. It was someone the community knew, someone who used to wear a badge, Grant Matthew Hardin. Hardin wasn't a stranger. He'd served in multiple law enforcement agencies across northwest Arkansas, Fayetteville, Huntsville, Eureka Springs. In early 2016, he'd even been hired as the police chief of Gateway, but resigned just a few months later. He'd also served 2 terms as a constable in Benton County, and at the time of the murder was working as a corrections officer at the Northwest Arkansas Community Corrections Center, a women's facility. But Hardin's experience didn't protect him from suspicion. In fact, it raised more red flags. Witnesses had seen the shooting, and Hardin's own wife told investigators she assumed he'd been out in the yard at the time, which meant he had no alibi. There's still no confirmed motive. Some believed there had been tension between James and Hardin due to their roles in the small-town government. But when Hardin appeared in court on October 16, 2017, he refused to explain. All he said was, "I don't know how to say it, but I'm sorry." He pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and received a 30-year sentence. And that might have been the end of it, if not for what happened next. After his conviction, Hardin's DNA was entered into the system, and it matched a cold case from 1997, a brutal, calculated sexual assault at an elementary school in Rogers, Arkansas. Back then, a teacher had stayed behind after school to prepare her classroom. While over 250 people attended a church service in the cafeteria, she was attacked at gunpoint in the bathroom. The assailant sexually assaulted her there, then again in her classroom. He wore a stocking cap, sunglasses, and no shoes. He covered her face and carefully avoided leaving evidence behind. Police always suspected he might have law enforcement training, but the case went cold. In 2003, investigators filed a John Doe warrant, just as the statute of limitations was about to run out. And in 2017, when DNA was collected from Hardin after his murder conviction, it matched. In February 2019, Hardin pleaded guilty to 2 counts of sexual assault and was sentenced to 50 more years, 25 for each count. Combined with a 30-year murder sentence, he wouldn't even be eligible for parole until serving 21 years for the murder and 14 years for the sexual assaults. But then, somehow, he escaped. On May 25, 2025, Grant Hardin walked out of the North Central unit in Calico Rock. He was wearing a fake uniform that looked enough like a corrections officer's outfit to fool someone. Surveillance video showed him walking through a secure sally port around 2:55 p.m. A staff member opened the gate without verifying his identity, with a fake uniform and the demeanor of a law enforcement officer with experience. He was gone. The manhunt that followed was one of the largest Arkansas has seen in years. The FBI quickly offered a $10,000 reward, which was raised to $20,000. The U.S. Marshals added another $5,000. Law enforcement swarmed the region. Arkansas State Police, Border Patrol, Game and Fish, local sheriff's departments all joined in. Drones were launched. Tracking dogs picked up his trail. Roads were shut down. Hardin had deep ties to the area, Garfield, Pea Ridge, all across Benton County. He knew the terrain and he knew how law enforcement worked. That made him especially dangerous. Former Eureka Springs Police Chief Jim Hyatt wasn't surprised. He'd tried to fire Hardin back in 1996 for lying on a police report and using excessive force. Instead, Hardin resigned. Hyatt later told reporters he was abusive, excessive, and had a very bad temper. He was dangerous. Others in the community shared stories of Hardin chasing people down, running them off the road, even pulling a gun on someone. He wasn't just violent, he was calculating. 13 days after the escape, on June 7, 2025, authorities found him hiding near Moccasin Creek, less than 2 miles from the prison. Tracking dogs had picked up his scent. His identity was confirmed by fingerprint. He was taken back into custody and charged with second-degree escape. Investigators are still trying to determine whether he had help. One of the people most impacted by that escape was Cheryl Tillman, James Appleton's sister and the current mayor of Gateway. On May 25th, she was at home when her phone started blowing up. When she finally checked her messages, she saw the alert. Grant Hardin had escaped. She said it felt like her heart just stopped. Cheryl was serving on the Gateway City Council at the time of the murder, alongside her twin sister. Her husband Andrew was mayor. Now she leads the town, and once again she's left trying to hold everything together. She described Hardin as angry and evil, with a long history of violence. She admitted she was scared, not just for herself, but for her whole family and her community. While she praised local law enforcement, including Benton County and the Pea Ridge officers, she had harsh words for the state. The only thing we heard was a phone call from the automated victim alert system, she said. Nobody from the Department of Corrections ever called us, not once. She was frustrated, and rightly so. As of July 2025, Hardin remains in custody, facing additional time for the escape. And while authorities work to determine what went wrong, victims like the Appleton family are left trying to process the trauma all over again. Louisa Dunne was a 75-year-old widow, living a quiet life alone at 58 Britannia Road in the Easton area of Bristol. Born in 1892, she had been widowed twice and over time retreated into a life of solitude. Her days were simple, filled with cups of tea, memories of a once active life in labor politics, and the comfort of books stacked around her modest home. She found peace in that quiet routine, but on the evening of June 27, 1967, that peace was violently interrupted. That night, several neighbors reported hearing something unsettling, a scream, short and sharp, then suddenly muffled. One described it as a crying out. Another said it was frightening, like someone being attacked. But when they looked outside, the street was still. No one was in sight. With no obvious signs of trouble, nothing more was done. The next morning, Louisa's neighbors grew concerned when she didn't appear outside like she normally did. One of them, V. Allen, climbed onto the windowsill of Louisa's house and peered inside. She saw her lying motionless on the floor. At first, she thought Louisa had suffered a heart attack, but when she touched her hand, she said it was as cold as ice. Louisa had been sexually assaulted and murdered in her own living room. The pathologist later determined she'd died from asphyxiation, strangled with a scarf with force applied to her mouth. There were bruises around her neck, cuts on her chin, and injuries consistent with a violent assault. At the time, the case triggered one of the largest investigations in Bristol's history. Over 19,000 sets of fingerprints and palm prints were compared to the one lifted from the window, believed to be the point of entry. More than 8,000 people were interviewed, but no match was found, and eventually the case went cold. What no one knew, not even Louisa's family, was that a tiny scrap of cloth would someday change everything. Louisa was wearing a blue skirt the night she was murdered. Investigators preserved it, even as years turned into decades. And in 2023, a new cold case team from Avon and Somerset Police decided to take another look. Forensic experts screened the skirt for traces of semen using modern techniques that didn't exist back in the 60s. After testing the back of the garment, boxed away for more than half a century, scientists detected sperm cells. From those, they generated a full DNA profile. That DNA was uploaded to the UK's national database. The match, Ryland Headley, a 92-year-old man living quietly in Ipswich. He had come to Britain from Jamaica in the 1950s and lived in Bristol at the time of Louisa's murder. Records placed him just under 2 miles from Louisa's home in 1967, but shortly after the murder, he left the area. In 1977, 10 years after Louisa's death, Headley committed 2 brutal sexual assaults in Ipswich. He broke into the homes of 2 elderly widows, one 84, the other 79, threatened to kill them and attack them in the darkness. During one of the assaults, the victim pleaded with him, "Haven't you got a mother?" He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. But shockingly, an appeals court reduced his sentence to just 7 years. A psychiatrist had testified that the attacks were due to sexual frustration caused by his demanding wife, and the court accepted it. Headley served only about 2 years before being released in 1980. For the next 43 years, he blended back into society, undetected, hiding a monstrous secret. It wasn't until November 2024 that detectives knocked on the door of his Ipswich home and arrested him for Louisa's murder.
No, you can't come now. I'm just coming now. Where you want to come in for?
I'll explain because it's a bit sensitive, so we'd like to come in and speak to you properly, please.
Eh?
May I come in to speak to you properly?
I mean, I've just got up. I'm an old man.
I'm sorry, it's quite early.
I'm very sick. Not well at all.
You're not well?
No.
Okay.
What do you want? What is it about?
I'll tell you inside because we don't want other people hearing. So can we just come in and get you seated and have a chat? Thank you very much. Here's Mr. Headley, yes?
Eh?
Mr. Headley?
Yeah.
Ryland Headley, lovely. Thank you very much. This is my colleague Joe. We've just got a camera recording as well, just so you're aware.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm here today because I'm arresting you
Yeah.
on suspicion of the rape and murder
Yeah.
of Louisa Dunne, which happened in Bristol in June 1967.
Yeah.
The reason I'm arresting you
Yeah.
is because the police have investigative material that indicates you are responsible for that rape and murder of Mrs. Dunne,
Yeah.
which happened at Britannia Road in Easton, Bristol, June 1967.
Yeah.
You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you don't mention when questioned something that you later rely on in court.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anything you do say may be given in evidence.
Yeah.
I need to do this.
Where all this come from? Where get all this from?
We have investigative information, so we have material that suggests that it's yourself, and we need to basically arrest you and take you to the custody so that we can conduct an interview with you, so we can hear, your event and interview about it.
Into what?
Interview you about it and get your account.
That palm print found on her window all those years ago, one that had been checked against nearly 20,000 people, was now confirmed to be his. And that wasn't all. He'd been asked to give a palm print during an unrelated 2012 investigation, but refused, claiming arthritis prevented him from bending his wrist. At trial, Headley showed little emotion. Now in his 90s, frail and soft-spoken, he pled not guilty. But the evidence was overwhelming. The DNA, the palm print, his proximity to the crime, his history. 4 fingerprint experts testified that the palm print from Louisa's window matched Headley's hypothenar region, just beneath the pinky finger. After nearly 10 hours of deliberation, on June 30th, 2025, the jury found Rylan Headley guilty of the sexual assault and murder of Louisa Dunne. The following day, July 1st, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 20 years. But there was something unusual about the sentence, something tied to the era in which the crime was committed. Because Louisa's murder happened in 1967, the court was bound by the sentencing laws of that time, not the laws in place today. Prior to 2003, it wasn't the judge who set the minimum term for life sentences. It was the Home Secretary, in consultation with the trial judge and the Lord Chief Justice. As a result, the court had very few examples to go by. In fact, the only relevant case they found involved a burglar convicted of murdering 2 people, who was given a 20-year minimum term. Today, a sexually motivated murder like Louisa's would typically carry a minimum of 30 years. But because of how sentencing worked in 1967, Justice Sweeting had to base Headley's punishment on what would have been imposed then. Still, he made one thing clear, regardless of the number: Rylan Headley would never walk free again. He was 35 years old at the time of the murder and lived free until now, at the age of 92. With this conviction, Headley became the oldest person in British history to be found guilty of murder. The only surviving member of Louisa's family, her granddaughter, Mary Dayton, sat just a few feet away from him in court. She later said she felt a deep, unexplainable connection to her grandmother, and that the same DNA that caught him was also part of her. Headley was born in the West Indies in September 1932 and immigrated to the UK in 1952. By 1958, he was married with 3 children and living in Bristol. After Louisa's murder, he moved just beyond the original search radius, eventually settling in Ipswich. But by the early 70s, he was working as a railway machinist and committing a string of burglaries and other offenses. Between 1973 and 1978, he admitted to at least 10 burglaries in Ipswich. Now, in the wake of his 2025 conviction, police in Suffolk and Norfolk have begun reviewing unsolved sexual assaults and murders of elderly women from the 1970s and 80s. Among the cases now under renewed scrutiny, the killings of Edna Harvey in 1984, Doris Shelley in 1993, and Karen Hells, also in 1993. Stephen Kilwein was born on September 10, 1941, in Dickinson, North Dakota, to Martin and Annie Kilwein. He grew up in a working-class home and eventually graduated from Dickinson State College with degrees in art and business. Those who knew him best described Stephen as warm, funny, and deeply compassionate, a man who didn't just talk about helping people, he actually did. He married Judith Pavlicek on April 14, 1964, and together they raised 5 children. Stephen was the kind of dad who made you laugh with a dry joke, but always showed up when it mattered. He adored his kids and grandkids, and never missed a chance to dote on them. His professional life was as impressive as it was varied. Early in his career, he taught English for the Job Corps, and later became a drug and alcohol counselor at the state hospital in Jamestown. That work left a deep impression on him. He believed in second chances and practiced what he preached, hiring those struggling with addiction, helping people find footing when they had none, and even welcoming some into his home. By the late 60s, Stephen pivoted to banking as a loan officer at Liberty Bank, all while feeding his creative side as a painter. Eventually, he realized painting steeples paid better than painting landscapes, and he leaned into real estate and construction. Through the 70s and 80s, he built homes, developed subdivisions, and left his mark on Dickinson. Many locals still remember the businesses he ran: Kilwein Construction, Kilwein Lumber, the Carpet Castle, the Mint Bar, as well as commercial spaces like Mr. Steak and Happy Joe's. He even co-owned a gold mine in Virginia City, Montana. In 1986, Stephen and Judy moved to Bozeman, Montana. He kept building, kept creating, and never stopped remodeling his 1910 home. After Judy passed away in 2019, Stephen split his time between Bozeman and Broomfield, Colorado, where his youngest daughter lived. He lived a peaceful life, and he didn't have enemies. But on Sunday, June 13th, 2021, everything changed. Stephen was found murdered inside his home around 11 a.m. in his red and white house on the corner of 9th and Mendenhall in Bozeman. And tragically, he wasn't even supposed to be there. He had planned to be in Denver that weekend, but a long-awaited doctor's appointment had been rescheduled, so he stayed home. The night before, he spoke to his oldest son, Kurt. They laughed and said goodnight with an "I love you." The next day, calls and texts went unanswered. At first, the family brushed it off, but as the day wore on, the silence became unsettling. A message in the family group chat, "Has anyone talked to Dad today?" was met with radio silence. That wasn't like him. He usually talked to at least one of them every single day. Fearing he may have tripped or fallen, the family requested a welfare check. Officers arrived and found Stephen in the kitchen, in front of the refrigerator, lying in a large pool of blood. Initially, the coroner told the family that Stephen had been electrocuted, which shocked the family because he had worked in construction for over 50 years. He knew how to handle wiring. The only exposed wires in the house were near a light switch that controlled a ceiling light. It didn't make sense, and it didn't make sense to the medical examiner either. Within days, the story changed. The autopsy revealed Stephen hadn't been electrocuted. He'd been murdered. Also, both the front door and the bedroom door had been forced open. Still, no weapon had been found. It wasn't until they received the death certificate that the horrifying truth became clear. Stephen had suffered multiple chop-type wounds. The word chopping was used, broad enough to include a cleaver, axe, hatchet, or even a hammer. And since Stephen had been remodeling, there were tools all over the house. According to the certificate, the estimated time of death was 11:20 a.m. That same Sunday morning, church services were taking place next door. People were walking by on sidewalks. The neighborhood was busy. How could someone walk into his house, kill him so violently, and walk out unnoticed? It didn't even look like a robbery because Stephen had just sold his Suburban for $2,400 in cash, and the money was still in his wallet, along with his credit cards. Expensive tools were untouched. Nothing obvious had been taken. Then came the key piece of evidence, a cell phone found in Stephen's front yard. It didn't belong to him. It belonged to 25-year-old Austin John Close, a former Bozeman High football player and a recent graduate of Montana State University. When detectives questioned Close, he claimed he lost the phone walking home drunk from the bars. He said he never entered Stephen's home and offered to give a DNA sample, then changed his mind the next day after speaking with family and a lawyer. The case stalled, but the detectives kept working. In November 2021, they collected trash from Close's residence. Inside was mail, receipts, and a used water bottle. That bottle was sent to the Montana State Crime Lab, and it changed everything. Close's DNA from the bottle matched DNA found on Stephen's pajama bottoms. Additional DNA was recovered from under Stephen's fingernails. According to the lab, the results were staggering. Cell tower data also placed Close's phone at the scene of the crime between 12:15 and 1 a.m. that morning. A neighbor later reported hearing raised voices around 2 a.m., 3 people talking loudly, a loud crash, and then someone saying, "Oh shit." On July 9, 2024, more than 3 years after Stephen's murder, police arrested Austin Close and charged him with deliberate homicide. He was booked into the Gallatin County Detention Center on a $1 million bond. He made his first court appearance on July 11, 2025, in Gallatin County Justice Court, where the charge was formally read. His next court date is set for July 25, 2025, for pretrial proceedings in Gallatin County District Court. Stephen Kilwein lived a full, generous life. He built homes, gave people second chances, and raised a family rooted in love. His murder was brutal and senseless, and it left his children and grandchildren grasping for answers in the wake of unimaginable loss. He showed up for everything, every school play, every sports game, every graduation. He was supposed to walk his grandson into kindergarten. That never happened, and his grandson still cries for him, not even knowing the full truth, just that grandpa is gone. This case is still unfolding, and even with an arrest, what his family really wants is the full truth and justice.